We've all had those moments when life decides to flip the script, tossing you into chaos before you can even process what's happening. This was one of those moments for me, but at the time, I couldn't know how deep the rabbit hole went. My wife, Andrea, was on a business trip in Austria. She worked in real estate development, specializing in luxury properties. Her job often took her to exotic locations, meeting with high-profile clients. I always admired her ambition, though it sometimes made our lives feel more like parallel tracks than a shared journey. I tell myself it was temporary, part of the sacrifice for success. We lived in Reno, Nevada, a city that blended the rugged charm of the desert with the fast-paced allure of casinos and urban life. Our home was perched on the edge of town, near the foothills, offering stunning sunsets, but a fair amount of isolation. It suited us, or so I thought. When Andrea left for her week-long trip, everything seemed normal. We had a quiet dinner the night before, joked about her needing to pack warmer clothes, and exchanged a quick kiss at the airport. "I'll miss you," I said, meaning it, though I'd grown used to her absences. She smiled, distracted by a call from her assistant, and hurried through security. The first few days were uneventful. I worked my usual hours at the local auto repair shop, caught up on a few Netflix shows Andrea hated, and tinkered with a classic Mustang in the garage. We exchanged texts, brief and matter-of-fact. She was busy with meetings and site visits, and I didn't want to bother her. Then, out of nowhere, my body started acting strange. At first, it was just fatigue, a bone-deep tiredness that made it hard to get through the day. By midweek, I developed a low-grade fever and some discomfort, for lack of a better word. I chalked it up to stress or maybe a mild infection. Nothing to worry about. But Friday morning, I woke up drenched in sweat, and something felt off. Really off. That's when I decided to see a doctor. It wasn't the kind of thing you ignore. Andrea called that afternoon, her voice cheerful. She was supposed to fly back the next day, but she warned me about a storm hitting Europe. "They're saying flights might be delayed," she said. "But I'll keep you updated." "How's everything there?" I hesitated. "Fine. Just tired. Probably coming down with something." "You're not pushing yourself too hard, are you?" she asked, her tone softening. "No, just the usual. You know me." "Okay. Get some rest. I'll call you later." As soon as we hung up, I got a text from my doctor's office. "Urgent lab results. Call us immediately." I felt my stomach twist. When I called, the nurse's voice was calm but firm. "We need you to come back in for additional tests," she said. "There's an irregularity in your blood work. We'll explain more in person." "Is it serious?" "It's best if you come in." "Can you make it this afternoon?" I hung up, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. What could they mean by irregularity? My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The doctor's office felt sterile and cold, the kind of place where bad news felt inevitable. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, got straight to the point. "Your initial tests indicate an unexpected result," she said, her voice careful. "It's possible you've contracted a sexually transmitted disease. We'll need to run further tests to confirm and determine the cause." I stared at her, stunned. "That's not possible," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes symptoms can be dormant for years," she said, her tone neutral. "We'll sort this out. For now, it's important to avoid speculation." Speculation? My mind was already spiraling. I'd been with Andrea for 15 years, faithfully. There was no room for doubt in my loyalty. "Is there any chance this is a mistake?" I asked, clinging to a shred of hope. "It's always possible," she said. "That's why we're doing more tests." I walked out of the office in a daze, the crisp Nevada air doing little to clear my head. Andrea's text popped up on my phone as I sat in my car, staring at the dashboard. "Storm's getting worse. Looks like I won't be able to fly back tomorrow. Sorry, babe. I'll keep you posted." I read the words over and over, her cheerful tone clashing with the storm brewing in my mind. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Instead, I drove home, parked in the garage, and sat in silence for what felt like hours. The Mustang sat half-finished under its tarp, a project Andrea had once called Your other wife. I used to laugh when she said that. Now, the thought made my chest tighten. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about a medical anomaly. Something didn't add up. And for the first time, I let myself wonder if Andrea's storm was more than just weather. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind replayed every conversation Andrea and I had over the past year, searching for cracks I might have missed. Every business trip, every late night at the office, every casual smile she gave her phone before turning the screen away, it all took on a sinister new weight. But I told myself I was being paranoid. There had to be an explanation, something innocent the first hadn't thought of yet. Andrea was my wife, my partner, the woman I'd built a life with. The idea of her betraying me felt too far-fetched to take seriously. The next morning, I was jolted awake by my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was the doctor's office. "We've confirmed the presence of an STI," the nurse said, her voice carefully measured. "It's chlamydia. The good news is it's treatable. We'll call in a prescription for antibiotics." I barely heard the rest. My mind had latched onto that word, chlamydia, a damning label for something I couldn't explain. I thanked her mechanically and hung up, my thoughts a chaotic jumble. I paced the living room, trying to process. The diagnosis didn't just raise questions about my health, it ripped open a Pandora's box of doubts about my marriage. Chlamydia doesn't just appear out of nowhere. My first instinct was to call Andrea, to demand answers. But what could I even say? "Hey honey, remember that storm in Austria? Well, funny story, I have an STI now. Care to explain?" I shoved my phone back in my pocket and headed to the garage, hoping some mindless work on the Mustang would clear my head. But even the comforting familiarity of engine parts and grease couldn't drown out the nagging questions. Andrea texted around noon. "Still snowed in. They've cancelled flights for the day. I might be here another couple of nights." Ugh. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Any updates on your meetings?" I typed, trying to sound casual. "Not much. Just waiting for the weather to clear," she replied almost instantly. Her words felt hollow, like a script. Or maybe I was just looking for cracks where there were none. By the end of the day, my anxiety had reached a breaking point. I called Marcus, my closest friend and someone I could trust with the truth. Marcus and I had been friends since high school, the kind of bond where we could pick up right where we left off, even after weeks of not talking. "Hey man, you sound like crap," he said when he picked up. "Yeah, it's been a week," I said, forcing a weak laugh. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Listen, I need some advice. Hypothetically, if you found out something weird about your health, something that didn't make sense, what would you do?" There was a pause. "Weird how?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Like medically. Something that doesn't add up with your, lifestyle." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then let out a low whistle. "Man, that's not the kind of thing you handle alone. You talked to Andrea about it yet?" "That's complicated," I admitted. "Well, if it's something serious, you've got to bring her in. Marriage is a team sport, dude. Secrets just make things worse." His words hit harder than he probably intended. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair where Andrea usually sat. Her absence felt heavier than usual, like a void I couldn't ignore. That night, as I scrolled through social media, I noticed something odd. Andrea's work account, usually filled with updates about projects and meetings, had been unusually quiet during her trip. No photos of conference rooms or scenic Austrian landscapes. Nothing about clients or presentations. I checked her personal account next. The last post was from a week ago, a photo of our dog captioned, "Miss this little guy already." It was innocuous enough, but it made me wonder, if she was snowed in, what was she doing to pass the time? Why wasn't she posting pictures of the storm or complaining about the delays? The questions piled up, each one more unsettling than the last. By the time I crawled into bed, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to accuse her outright, not yet. But I needed answers, and I wasn't going to wait until she got home to get them. The next morning, I made a call to her office in Reno, under the guise of checking on an unrelated detail. The receptionist, a sweet older woman named Carol, answered cheerfully. "Oh, Andrea's not here, of course," she said when I asked about her availability. Right, she's in Austria, I said, keeping my tone light. How's the project going? Carol hesitated. Austria? Oh, I don't really know much about that. You'd have to ask her directly. Her words set off alarm bells. Carol had been at the office for years. If Andrea was on a major project, she'd know about it. I hung up, my heart racing. Something was definitely off. That evening, as the snowstorm supposedly raged on in Europe, I made another decision. I wasn't going to let my imagination run wild. If Andrea had nothing to hide, I'd find proof. And if she did, well, I wasn't ready to face that yet. The next day, I woke up with a single purpose: to find out what Andrea was really doing in Austria. I couldn't sit idly by, plagued by doubts. If there was an innocent explanation, I needed to hear it. And if there wasn't, I needed to know what I was up against. Andrea's texts that morning were brief and mundane. Something about still being stuck in her hotel, catching up on emails, and hoping the storm would let up soon. I responded in kind, forcing myself to act normal, though my nerves were fraying with every passing hour. At lunchtime, I called Marcus again, this time laying more cards on the table. Man, I think something's going on with Andrea, I said, pacing the kitchen. Going on how? He asked, his tone immediately serious. I hesitated, unsure how much I could even explain. It's hard to put into words. She's on this work trip, but things aren't adding up. Her office didn't seem to know much about it. And there's other stuff. Medical stuff. Medical? He repeated, his voice dropping. Are you okay? I don't know, I admitted. But something's not right. I need to figure it out. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then said, Okay. What's your plan? I don't know yet, I said. But I think I need to look into her trip. Maybe. I don't know, check her emails or something. Marcus let out a low whistle. That's dicey, man. What if you're wrong? You go digging, and she finds out. You might blow up your marriage for nothing. What if I'm right? I countered. There was a long pause. If you're right, then you deserve to know, Marcus said finally. But be careful. Once you open that door, there's no closing it. After we hung up, I sat in front of Andrea's laptop, staring at the login screen. She kept it password protected, of course, but I'd seen her type it in enough times to take a guess. My hands hovered over the keyboard, my chest tight with guilt and apprehension. After 3 failed attempts, I hit the right combination. Her desktop loaded, neat and organized, just like Andrea herself. I clicked on her email, scrolling through the inbox for anything that stood out. At first, it all seemed routine: work correspondences, project updates, newsletters from trade organizations. But then I saw a string of emails from someone named Look. The subject lines were vague. Quick question, follow up, looking forward to it. I clicked on the most recent one, my hands trembling. It wasn't incriminating, not exactly. Luke asked about meeting times and logistics, referencing something about taking the opportunity to catch up in person. There were no details about what they were working on, though his tone was familiar, even casual. I searched her inbox for more emails from Luke, piecing together a fragmented narrative. He worked for a company in Austria, something about consulting on luxury developments. They'd met at a conference last year and kept in touch sporadically. But one email, buried in an older thread, stopped me cold. I'm glad we're finally making this happen, Luke had written a few weeks ago. It's been too long. Can't wait to see you. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Who was this guy? And why did it sound like their relationship went beyond professional? I didn't have concrete evidence yet, just a growing pit of dread. But I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that I'd stumbled onto something bigger than I'd expected. Andrea called that evening, her voice bright and cheery. Good news! The storm's letting up. I should be able to fly out tomorrow. That's great, I said, forcing a smile into my voice. I'll pick you up at the airport. Thanks, babe. Everything okay there? Yeah, just the usual, I said, keeping my tone light. I've been working on the Mustang. Can't wait for you to see it. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. She'd be home soon, and maybe I could get some real answers. But that night, I couldn't shake the image of Luke's emails. What did he mean by making this happen? And why hadn't Andrea ever mentioned him? I knew I couldn't confront her without more information. If there was an innocent explanation, I'd feel like a paranoid fool. But if there wasn't... I opened her laptop again, this time searching for her travel itinerary. It didn't take long to find it, a PDF tucked away in a folder labeled Travel. As I skimmed through the document, a single line jumped out at me. Her hotel reservation wasn't in Salzburg, where she'd said her meetings were. It was in Vienna, over 300 kilometers away. My stomach twisted. Andrea wasn't just bending the truth, she was outright lying. And for the first time, I couldn't convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Andrea's flight was scheduled to land the next evening, but the hours leading up to her arrival stretched endlessly. I busied myself with the Mustang, scrubbing every inch of the garage, organizing tools, anything to keep my hands moving and my thoughts from spiraling. But it didn't work. Every time I paused, the questions came rushing back. Why had Andrea lied about her hotel? Who was Luke, really? And most pressing of all, what was I supposed to do when she walked through the door? By the time I headed to the airport, I still didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't pretend everything was fine. Not anymore. Andrea looked radiant when she emerged from the terminal, her coat slung over her arm and her carry-on trailing behind her. She smiled when she saw me, but something about it felt off. Or maybe I was just looking for cracks where there were none. "Hey you," she said, leaning in for a kiss. "Hey," I replied, my voice stiff. The drive home was quiet, the hum of the engine filling the space where our usual chatter should have been. She mentioned how grueling her meetings had been, how glad she was to be home. I nodded along, my hands gripping the wheel a little too tightly. Back at the house, she kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the couch. "God, I miss this place," she said, stretching like a cat. I stood in the doorway, watching her. For a moment, I almost convinced myself to let it go, to chalk it all up to coincidence and overthinking. But then she turned to me, her brow furrowing. "You're quiet. Everything okay?" I hesitated, the words caught in my throat. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something," I said finally, sitting down across from her. Her expression shifted, just a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. "What's up?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "When you were gone, I had some medical stuff come up. They ran some tests, and it turns out I've got an STI. Andrea's face froze, her smile vanishing. For a long moment, she just stared at me, her eyes wide. "That's impossible," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's what I thought too," I said, leaning forward. "But it's not. And I haven't been with anyone else, Andrea. So I need you to explain what's going on." Her hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. I mean, there's no way. I've been completely faithful, you know that." Her words rang hollow, like she was reciting lines from a script. "Then how do you explain this?" I asked, my voice rising despite myself. "Because it doesn't just happen, Andrea. And while we're at it, why did your hotel reservation show Vienna instead of Salzburg? What were you really doing over there?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she was going to come clean. But instead she shook her head, her voice trembling. "You're being ridiculous. I can't believe you're accusing me of whatever this is. I've been working my ass off for us, and this is what I come home to." I stood, pacing the room. "Don't turn this around on me. Just tell me the truth, Andrea." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I can't. I don't know how to explain this. I swear to God I haven't done anything." The denial only made my anger grow. "Then explain Luke," I snapped. "Explain why he was so excited to catch up with you. Why your office didn't even know about this trip. Do you know how insane this all sounds?" Her head snapped up, her face pale. "You went through my emails?" "I had to, Andrea," I said, my voice firm. "Because nothing about this adds up. And the more I dig, the worse it gets. So if there's something you're not telling me, now's the time." For a long time, she didn't say anything. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally she stood, her hands trembling. I need some air, she said, grabbing her coat. Seriously? That's your response? I said, following her to the door. She turned, her eyes blazing. I don't know what you want me to say, okay? I've told you the truth. If you don't believe me, that's on you. And with that, she walked out, leaving me alone in the empty house. I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands. For the first time, I wondered if Marcus was right, if I'd opened a door I couldn't close. But deep down, I knew there was no turning back. Whatever Andrea was hiding, I was going to find out. The house was oppressively quiet after Andrea left. I tried to sit still, but every second felt like an eternity. My mind raced with half-formed thoughts, desperate explanations, and more questions than I could count. She'd stormed out without addressing anything. Was that guilt? Defensiveness? I grabbed my phone and called Marcus again. I needed to hear a sane voice, even if he thought I was losing it. She walked out? Marcus asked, sounding incredulous. Yeah, I muttered. She said she needed air, but she didn't deny anything, not really. Just kept saying she hadn't done anything. Man, that's... I don't know what to tell you, Marcus said. It's not looking good, though. What's your next move? I don't know, I admitted. But I can't just let this drop. She's lying about something, I know it. Maybe she just panicked, Marcus offered. People get defensive when they feel cornered. Maybe there's an explanation you haven't thought of. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. After we hung up, I went back to the laptop. If Andrea wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd have to find it myself. Her browsing history didn't reveal much, mostly work-related sites, travel bookings, and a couple of online shopping tabs. But then I stumbled across a folder on her desktop labeled Personal. Inside, I found a file titled Luke Itinerary. I opened it, my heart pounding. The document detailed a schedule that didn't match any work conference. Instead, it was filled with plans for dinners, sightseeing, and, most damningly, reservations for 2 at a luxury spa in Vienna. The dates matched her trip exactly. My hands shook as I scrolled through the itinerary. There was no way to misinterpret this. It wasn't just a work trip. Andrea hadn't gone to Austria for business at all. I felt a wave of nausea, the kind that makes you question whether you're awake or trapped in a nightmare. This wasn't just about an STI anymore. This was proof, concrete and undeniable. Andrea was cheating on me. The door opened, and I jumped, slamming the laptop shut. Andrea stepped inside, her cheeks red from the cold. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. Are you still mad? She asked, her voice quiet. Mad? I thought, incredulous. Mad doesn't even begin to cover it. Where were you? I asked, keeping my tone even. Just walking, she said, avoiding my eyes. I needed to clear my head. Did it help? She hesitated, then nodded. A little. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Andrea, we need to talk. For real this time. No running off, no excuses. She froze, her hand tightening on the strap of her purse. I've already told you everything I can, she said. No, you haven't, I said, standing up. You've been lying to me, Andrea. And I know. About Luke. About Vienna. About everything. Her face went pale. What are you talking about? I found the itinerary, I said, my voice rising despite myself. The dinners, the spa, everything. You weren't there for work. You were there with him. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it. But then her shoulders slumped, and her expression crumpled. Okay, she said softly, tears streaming down her face. Okay, yes. I lied. I wasn't there for work. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. How long? I asked, my voice hollow. She sank into the couch, her hands shaking. A few months, she whispered. I didn't plan for it to happen. It just did. That's not an answer, I snapped. How long, Andrea? Since last summer, she admitted, her voice breaking. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Last summer? That was nearly a year ago. All those late nights, those trips. How many lies had I believed without question? Why? I asked, my voice barely audible. Was it me? Was I not enough for you? She shook her head, sobbing. It wasn't about you. It was. I don't know. I was stressed and Luke was there. He listened. He made me feel. Don't. I cut her off, my voice sharp. Don't you dare try to justify this. You destroyed our marriage for what? A fling? Some guy who listened? I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, her voice desperate. I never wanted to hurt you. I swear. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You've done a hell of a job. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. Where are you going? She called after me. For air, I said, slamming the door behind me. I drove aimlessly through the empty streets of Reno, the cold desert air biting at my skin even inside the truck. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but I couldn't let go. Andrea's confession replayed in my mind, each word hitting like a hammer against my chest. A few months. Since last summer. I tried to think back to that time. What had changed? Were there signs I missed? I thought about her late nights at work, the sudden business trips, the way she'd seemed distant but always had a plausible excuse. I'd brushed it all off, told myself we were just in a rough patch. I stopped at a gas station and sat in the parking lot, the neon lights casting an eerie glow across the dashboard. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, half hoping it was Marcus. It was Andrea. I let the call ring out, then listened as her voicemail came through. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I know you're hurt, and you have every right to be. But I want to fix this. Please, just come home so we can talk. Her words made me feel sick. Fix this? How do you fix something like this? I started driving again, not toward home, but to Marcus's place. When I arrived, he opened the door with a look of concern that deepened when he saw my face. Jesus, man. You look wrecked, he said, stepping aside to let me in. She admitted it, I said, my voice flat. Marcus's face fell. Damn. I was hoping. He trailed off, shaking his head. Come in, sit down. I dropped onto his couch, the weight of the night pressing down on me. It's been going on for months, I said. She lied about everything. The trips, the late nights, hell, even this last one. She was with him, not at some stupid conference. Marcus sat across from me, his expression a mix of sympathy and frustration. I don't even know what to say, man. I can't believe it. Neither can I muttered. I feel like an idiot. How could I not see this coming? Don't do that to yourself, Marcus said firmly. You trusted her. That's not a crime. She's the one who broke the rules. I nodded, but his words didn't make me feel any better. What the hell am I supposed to do now? Marcus leaned back, his face thoughtful. First thing, you need to figure out what you want. Do you even want to try to work things out with her? I thought about Andrea's tearful confession, the way she'd said she wanted to fix things. Could I even begin to forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? I don't know, I admitted. Right now, all I feel is anger. And hurt. I can't even think straight. That's normal, Marcus said. Don't make any big decisions tonight. Give yourself time to process. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the situation settling over us like a fog. Eventually, I stood up. I should head back, I said. I don't want to be there, but I can't leave things like this. Marcus nodded. You need anything, you call me. Day or night, okay? Thanks, I said, meaning it. The drive home was quieter than before, the city's lights fading as I turned onto our dark street. When I walked into the house, Andrea was sitting on the couch, her face pale and tear-streaked. You came back, she said softly. I nodded, my chest tight. We need to talk. She wiped her eyes and gestured to the seat across from her. I know I've ruined everything, she said, her voice trembling. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. For all of it. Why, Andrea? I asked, my voice cracking. Why him? Why any of this? She took a shaky breath. It wasn't about you, she said. It was. I don't even know how to explain it. I felt stuck, like my whole life was just work and routines and… I don't know. Luke came along, and it felt exciting, different. But it was a mistake. The biggest mistake I've ever made. I stared at her, trying to process her words. So what now? I asked. You think we just move past this? No, she said quickly. I don't expect that. I don't want to lose you. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Therapy, counseling, whatever you need. Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that we could somehow piece things back together. But another part of me wasn't sure I even wanted to try. I need time, I said finally. I can't decide anything right now. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Take all the time you need, she whispered. I went upstairs and shut the bedroom door behind me, leaving Andrea alone in the silence. For the first time, I wondered if the house would ever feel like home again. The days that followed were a strange, excruciating limbo. Andrea tiptoed around me, her usual confidence replaced by cautious glances and hesitant movements. I avoided her as much as I could, spending long hours in the garage or taking drives through the desert with no destination in mind. At night, I slept in the guest room, staring at the ceiling until exhaustion finally dragged me under. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the bed we'd shared for years, the same bed where I'd once believed our love was unbreakable. Andrea tried to talk to me a few times, but I wasn't ready. Every time I looked at her, I saw the emails, the itinerary, the hotel in Vienna. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. I needed answers, but I also needed space to figure out what those answers would mean for me, for us. One afternoon, Marcus came by unannounced, holding a 6-pack of beer and a box of takeout. Figured you could use some company, he said, stepping into the garage where I'd been working on the Mustang. I gave him a weak smile. You figured right. We ate in silence for a while, the smell of greasy burgers filling the air. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. So, what's the plan? He asked, his tone cautious. I shrugged. I don't know. I told her I need time. She says she wants to fix things, but how do you come back from something like this? Marcus nodded, taking a swig of his beer. It's not easy. But you gotta figure out what you want. Forget about her for a second. What do you want? I stared at the car's engine, my hands gripping a wrench. What did I want? That was the question I kept circling back to, and I still didn't have an answer. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to walk away, start over. But another part still loves her, even after all this. Marcus leaned against the workbench, his face thoughtful. Look, man, whatever you decide, you've got to be sure. If you stay, you can't hold this over her head forever. And if you leave, you've got to be ready to let go completely. No half measures. His words stuck with me long after he left. That evening, Andrea approached me in the living room, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Can we talk? She asked. I nodded reluctantly, motioning for her to sit. She hesitated, then sat down across from me, her eyes red and puffy. I've been looking into therapists, she said, her voice trembling. There's one in town who specializes in infidelity and marriage counseling. I thought maybe we could, go together. I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Therapy. Counseling. These were the things couples did when they were trying to salvage something, to rebuild trust after it had been shattered. I don't know if I'm ready for that, I said honestly. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I understand. But I'll go on my own, if that's what it takes. I don't want to give up on us. Her desperation was palpable, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I need more than words, Andrea, I said, my voice steady. I need to see that you're willing to do the work. And I need to know the truth. All of it. She nodded quickly. Anything. I'll tell you anything you want to know. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I asked, the question burning in my chest. Why did you keep lying, even after everything? She looked down at her hands, her voice barely a whisper. I was scared. I thought if I could just pretend it didn't happen, we could move past it. But I was wrong. I know that now. Her words didn't make me feel better, but they felt honest. For the first time, I sensed that she wasn't just trying to save herself, she was trying to save us. But whether that was enough remained to be seen. The following week was a fragile truce. Andrea made good on her promise to start therapy on her own, attending sessions twice and coming home visibly drained. I kept my distance, unable to shake the memory of her lies, but I could see her trying. She filled the house with small gestures, cooking meals, leaving handwritten notes on the counter apologizing again and again. I didn't throw them away, but I didn't respond either. I wasn't ready to meet her halfway, not yet. Instead, I buried myself in work and the Mustang. Marcus checked in regularly, reminding me not to rush any decisions, but even he seemed unsure of what to say anymore. Late one evening, Andrea knocked on the door of the guest room. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice tentative. I hesitated before answering. "Yeah." She stepped inside, holding a mug of tea. "I thought you might want this," she said, setting it on the nightstand. "Thanks," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She lingered, shifting awkwardly. "I don't want to bother you, but I just wanted to say I appreciate you staying. I know it's not easy." I nodded, unsure what to say. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped in her lap. "My therapist said I need to be honest with myself before I can be honest with you. And I think I've started to figure some things out." Her words piqued my curiosity, though I didn't let it show. "Like what?" She took a deep breath, her voice steady but soft. "Like why I did what I did. It wasn't about you, it was about me. About feeling stuck, like I'd lost part of who I was. But I also know that's no excuse for what I did. I betrayed you, and I hurt you, and that's on me." Her honesty caught me off guard. For weeks, I'd been bracing myself for more excuses, more deflection. But this felt different. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said finally. "And even if I can, I don't know if I'll ever trust you again." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I understand. I just want you to know that I'm not giving up. Even if it takes years, I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. If that's even possible." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of her words hanging between us. "Why now?" I asked suddenly. "Why are you being so honest now?" She looked down at her hands. "Because I've already lost so much. If I don't fight for this, fight for us, I'll lose the one thing that matters most." Her voice broke on the last word, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than anger. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a step towards something, an understanding maybe. "I can't promise anything," I said finally. "But if we're going to even try to fix this, it's going to take a lot more than words. You're going to have to show me you mean it." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will. I promise." That night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely consumed by anger. There was still a long road ahead, and I didn't know if we'd make it to the end. But for the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, we could try. The days slowly began to take on a rhythm. Andrea kept going to therapy, and I found myself cautiously listening when she shared snippets of her sessions. At first, I didn't want to hear it, but over time, I realized she wasn't just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. She was wrestling with her own demons, trying to piece together why she'd let things spiral so far out of control. I wasn't sure if I cared about the why. All I knew was that the trust between us felt like shattered glass, impossible to repair. Still, I didn't walk away. Something in me wasn't ready to give up entirely, even if I couldn't explain why. One night, after dinner, Andrea sat down across from me at the kitchen table. She looked nervous, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, her voice steady but soft. "About showing you that I mean it. That I'm serious about fixing this." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I want us to go to therapy together," she said. "Not just for me, but for us. I know it won't fix things overnight, but I think it's a step we need to take." Her words made my stomach twist. The idea of sitting in a room with a stranger, dissecting the wreckage of our marriage, felt like opening a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. I get it, she said quickly. And if you're not, that's okay. But I'm asking you to think about it. Even if it's just one session. Please. I looked at her, the hope in her eyes tempered by fear. She wasn't just asking me to consider therapy, she was asking me to consider us. Fine, I said finally. One session. That's all I'm promising. Her face lit up with relief. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling. The first session was uncomfortable, to say the least. The therapist, a calm woman in her 50s, asked us to talk about what had brought us there. Andrea went first, her voice shaky as she recounted her betrayal. I couldn't look at her while she spoke. Hearing her say the words out loud, acknowledging the affair, the lies, was like reliving it all over again. When it was my turn, I let out everything I'd been holding back, the anger, the hurt, the betrayal that felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I trusted her completely, I said, my voice raw. I never thought she was capable of something like this. And now I don't know if I'll ever trust her again. The therapist nodded, her expression empathetic. Trust is one of the hardest things to rebuild after a betrayal, she said. But it's not impossible. The question you both need to ask yourselves is whether you're willing to do the work to try. The session ended without any grand revelations, but it left me with a lot to think about. Andrea didn't push me to talk about it afterward, which I appreciated. Instead, she gave me space, letting me process everything in my own time. Over the next few weeks, we continued going to therapy. Each session was hard, dredging up emotions I'd tried to bury. But slowly, I began to feel a shift, not forgiveness, not yet, but a willingness to consider the possibility of rebuilding. Andrea, for her part, didn't just talk about change, she showed it. She opened up her life to me in ways she never had before, sharing every detail of her schedule, her therapy, her thoughts. One evening, as we sat on the couch together for the first time in months, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. I know I don't deserve another chance, she said. But I'm asking for one anyway. Not because I think I deserve it, but because I want to be better, for you, for us. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. The anger that had consumed me for so long began to ebb, replaced by something quieter, something more uncertain. I can't promise anything, I said finally. But I'm willing to try. Her tears spilled over, and she reached for my hand. For the first time in a long time, I let her take it. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't trust, not yet. But it was a beginning. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, the raw edges of my anger began to dull. Andrea and I continued therapy, both separately and together. The sessions weren't easy. Every time I felt like we were making progress, something would surface that dragged me back into the depths of doubt. But Andrea didn't waver. She showed up for every session, answered every question, and owned her mistakes in a way that surprised me. She didn't make excuses or try to deflect blame. Instead, she faced the consequences of her actions head-on, even when it was painful. One night, after a particularly emotional session, we sat in the living room in silence. The weight of everything we'd been through hung heavy in the air. Do you think we'll ever get back to where we were? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Andrea looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and sorrow. I don't think we can ever go back, she said. But maybe we can build something new. Something stronger. Her words stuck with me. I wasn't sure if I believed her yet, but I wanted to. Over time, I started to notice small changes. Andrea became more present, more attentive in ways I hadn't realized I'd been missing before. She planned dinners for us, suggested hikes in the Nevada foothills, and even took an interest in the Mustang, a project she'd once dismissed as a waste of time. It wasn't just about her efforts, though. Therapy forced me to confront my own role in our marriage. I wasn't responsible for her betrayal, but I realized I'd been so caught up in my routines, work, the car, the comfort of familiarity, that I hadn't noticed how distant we'd become. One evening, as we worked side by side in the garage, Andrea handed me a wrench with a small smile. You know, she said, I always thought this car was your way of escaping. But now I think it's how you process things. I looked at her, surprised. Maybe, I admitted. Or maybe it's just easier to fix something mechanical than to fix this. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. But you're still trying. And so am I. Her words stayed with me as the days turned into weeks. There were setbacks, of course, moments when the old anger flared up, when something would remind me of Vienna or Luke, and the fragile progress we'd made felt like it could shatter in an instant. But each time, we found a way to keep moving forward. One night, Andrea handed me a letter she'd written. It was long and heartfelt, detailing her regrets, her gratitude for the chance to try again, and her commitment to rebuilding what we'd lost. I wanted to put it all down, she said, her voice trembling, in case I can't always find the right words. I read the letter in silence, the weight of her honesty hitting me like a wave. For the first time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. I don't know if I can ever forgive you completely, I said, folding the letter carefully. But I'm starting to believe that maybe, someday, I can. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. That's all I want. A chance to try. That night, as we sat together on the couch, I realized that healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And for the first time, I was willing to take that journey with her. We still had a long way to go, and I didn't know where the road would lead. But for the first time, I wasn't looking back. Maybe we couldn't rebuild what we'd lost. But maybe, just maybe, we could build something new.